FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. It's Kerry, Lutz. The date is June 15th, 2015. There is trouble ahead on the world economy, the U.S. economy, especially Greece. Grexit, is it going to become a reality? Well, they've defaulted. When is a default not a default? Well, let's see what John Rubino has to say of dollarcollapse.com, co-author of The Money Bubble. The bubble looks like it's getting ready to pop now, doesn't it, John?
Hey, Kerry. Well, yeah, of course, I've thought the bubble was ready to pop since about 2012 or so. So I'm not a very good short-term indicator. But Greece is getting interesting. I think the assumption for a lot of people has been that because Greece is so small, the amount of money that we're talking about here with their debt workout is almost a rounding error for the European Central Bank, so that they would be bailed out one way or another when all is said and done. But boy, they're taking it down to the wire. For the last couple of months, they've had these meetings where one side or another storms out, and then talks are suspended, but then they start again. And we're at the tail end of that process now with basically the meetings getting shorter and shorter. So now, instead of 3 or 4 hours before they break up, now it's 45 minutes. They sit at a table, they put their positions on the table, they both sides claim that this is their final offer, and then they get up and leave. And so we're up against some hard deadlines for debt repayment now. And the markets are starting to think, oh my God, what if this doesn't work? And what if Greece actually defaults? So Greece is seeing massive capital outflows. Their stocks and bonds are tanking, and this is bleeding over into the rest of the global financial market. U.S. stocks are down this morning, and Asian and European stocks were down overnight. And there's turmoil in the bond market at the same time. So this could be the final bit of the game of chicken that has been going on for a long time before they sit down and actually hammer out an agreement. Or maybe Greece is actually going to be allowed to leave the Eurozone. This is an interesting test case for the common currency, because there's no real mechanism for somebody leaving once they've adopted the euro. And for Greece to leave would mean they've got to blaze some new legal and financial trails here. And it's not clear they've got the institutions in place to be able to do it. So it might be a chaotic breakup where all the money flows out of Greece and they default on pretty much everything in sight. And they go into they're already in a depression right now. So what comes after a depression? I don't know. Well, things get worse one way or another. And then possibly they turn to Russia and get interim funding from Russia, go back to the drachma at a greatly devalued rate, default on their debt permanently to the European Central Bank and to the big European banks that own various amounts of their debt, and then basically turn east, become not exactly a Russian satellite, but in some ways a Russian economic ally in the heart of Europe. This is a really interesting process in that scenario. And I think from a European standpoint, the conclusion is probably going to be obvious pretty soon, that just, cutting the check, doing what you have to do to keep Greece in the Eurozone and avoid this other scenario is going to be the way to go. But who knows? We really don't know at this point how it's going to turn out. But I think either way, you've got aspects of chaos, because obviously if Greece becomes a Russian economic ally, that's a big deal, and financially and politically is uncharted territory for Europe. On the other hand, if you just cut a big check for Greece and let them go on as they are with their pension plans and generally government spending as it's in place now going forward, then Italy and Spain and Portugal want that same deal, right? And they're much bigger. So it's much harder to just write a check to bail Italy out and allow them to continue to pile up debt at the current rate. And so that's what will happen next. So who knows? Fun times from a safe distance. It's interesting to watch from a theoretical standpoint, but really dangerous for almost any kind of nest egg, any kind of investment program, because there's the potential for extreme volatility but it's hard to say in which direction, and that therein lies the problem for money managers and savers out there. We just don't know what this is going to turn into.
Sounds like it's got disaster written all over it, and it's nothing like this has happened in modern post-World War II Europe. It's just, what's going to happen here?
Yeah, well, so you can say that about the whole developed world financial system. There's the potential for chaos, and nothing like this has ever happened before. We've never done this stuff before. We've never monetized this much debt, and encourage the financial sector and the private sector in general to take on these kinds of debts before. You've got $57 trillion of new debt since the last debt-driven crisis in 2008, 2009. And so we're even more highly leveraged now than we were back then. That's our only solution, is to borrow more and more money and to create more and more currency. And if it didn't work then, why should it work now? And it's clearly not working. Japan and Europe are eking out little bits of growth because they devalued their currencies so dramatically. The U.S., for instance, today just announced another drop in industrial production. We're now in technical recession in the manufacturing sector in the U.S., which is to say two consecutive quarters of negative growth. And how can you have a recovery if your manufacturing sector is shrinking quarter after quarter? And it sounds like the U.S. response to that as well. We're hiring all these new bartenders, and look at all the new corporate temps that just got jobs in the last couple of months. This is clearly a recovery because all these new jobs are coming online. Well, what they're not saying is that manufacturing people are getting laid off, and we're replacing them with bartenders, and so the net impact on the economy is negative. We're making less and less real stuff and offering more and more or less meaningless services to, we're cutting each other's hair, and we're doing yard sales, and we're serving each other drinks. That's not a real economy. And so all of this debt, in effect, is acting as a headwind, which makes it, even with, virtually zero interest rates, makes it impossible to grow. Because the only way we've become accustomed to growing is by having regular people and governments borrow more and more money and spend that money. Well, you hit a wall after a while in the debt accumulation process, where you can't do that anymore because you've already leveraged yourself to the hilt. And obviously the U.S. government is at that point, having doubled its already excessive debt in just the last 5 years. And most U.S. consumers are at that point too. Auto loans are through the roof. That's the bright spot in the economy, by the way, is auto sales. And which sounds fine, cars are manufactured items, and they're real things. But if you look at how they're being sold, it's regular people who already don't have very good credit ratings and already carry too much debt are taking out long-term car loans, and so we're basically stealing future auto sales by buying these cars now and financing them for 6 or 7 years. Nobody with a 6-year car loan is going to go out 3 years from now and buy a new car. That would make no sense because they're so underwater. So we're cannibalizing future growth in order to have a make-believe recovery right now while we're taking on huge amounts of new debt. That's a combination that basically sounds like Greece, doesn't it? And the whole world is doing it, with the difference that being that the U.S. and Japan and Great Britain have their own printing presses. So we can hide the effects of our financial stupidity, our financial malfeasance, by creating lots of new currency and pumping it out. And you get something called the money illusion, where the amount of wealth in society doesn't go up, but you create a lot of new currency, and people feel richer temporarily because they've got all this new money until the value of the money goes down, and to equalize everything out. And so that's what we've got going in the developed world countries with their own printing presses. But in the end, we end up like Greece, where our debts are so overwhelming and our creditors lose patience with us one way or another. In Greece's case, they want their money back. In our case, it's going to be the financial market saying, we don't want to hold your currency anymore. And the value of the major fiat currencies will start to go down. That is basically creditors saying, we're not lending you any more money, and we want you to pay us back. what you owe us now. And in order to get paid back, we're going to convert the currency that we hold into real stuff. So, a dollar is basically an IOU. It's a claim against some U.S. asset in the future. And so when the rest of the world decides they want to convert their IOUs into real stuff, then we'll see a dramatic fall in the value of the dollar, which is the same thing as saying a spike in asset prices. And so that's how we will go. It won't be like Greece, where everything just grinds to a halt because the creditors want their money back. It'll be having some kind of an asset inflation, a dramatic one, or a bond market crisis or a currency crisis, as the creditors, the holders of dollars out there, lose faith in us. So it's coming. It will take different forms for different countries, but we are all Greece in a fundamental way.
Nobody gets out of this unscathed. That's for certain. We know that, and it's corresponding with the emergence of a new gold payment system. We've got two competing ones out there, and GoldMoney, which is now in Goldbit, right?
BitGold. Yeah, a Canadian startup with a gold-backed payment system. Just used some of its the proceeds from its IPO to buy out GoldMoney, which is one of the really venerable gold storage companies. So that gives them a huge base of customers now, to which they can offer their gold-backed debit card and other payment options where you can just move money between currencies really easily and frictionlessly. And it's an interesting idea, and it's one that's been around for a long time. GoldMoney was originally created as a gold-backed currency, and it turned out the regulatory hurdles were just too high for their system to overcome. So they stuck with the other side of their business, which was gold storage, which is less exciting but still very lucrative in good times. And so now, in a sense, GoldMoney is getting back to its roots, but via BitGold. And so, the customer base of BitGold is growing quickly, but they can't offer their services to U.S. citizens, which is a big hurdle to overcome. If you don't have the U.S. market, it's hard to be a growth stock, hard to be a fast-growing company. So we'll see how that goes. And then it turns out that Peter Schiff's Euro-Pacific Bank has been offering a similar service for a few years now. And that's also growing steadily. So it's out there. It's possible for non-U.S. citizens to basically create their own gold standard, where they convert their fiat currency into gold and then spend it the way they would spend their euros or yen or yuan or whatever, but keep their savings, keep their balance in a stronger real money like gold. And so it's an interesting process. It kind of meshes with Bitcoin in the sense that the market is looking for alternatives to fiat currencies. And in general, the people providing the best versions of these alternative, cryptocurrency, if you want to call them that, or asset-backed currency or whatever, they're meeting with some success in the marketplace. People like the idea and they're willing to give it a try. And so it's only going to grow from here as long as it doesn't blow up in some way. And these things are still very early in their evolution. So we don't know, one, whether they can survive the regulatory onslaught, which is going to be inevitable. If the major countries and their central banks feel threatened by these new payment systems, new forms of money, then they're going to lash out. And that's already happening with Bitcoin, where various countries are regulating it in different ways. And that's making it it's making it harder for a consistent standard of operations to spring up around the world. But it doesn't make it impossible. The internet allows you to bypass a lot of government regulations. And so we're going to find out over the next few years how this all shakes out and which of these currencies, if any, turn out to be viable mass market entities. And, you've got network effects at work here, where the first mover advantage in this kind of a market is huge, because the more people use something like Bitcoin or BitGold, the more valuable it becomes, because it's easier for you to make and receive payments if lots of other people are on the same network. So as the network gets bigger, barriers to entry expand. It gets harder and harder to break into this market when you're up against somebody that's already being used by millions of people. Sort of like the Facebook thing. It's hard to have a new social app, hard to build one, when everybody's already on Facebook. Why should they change if you only have a few people on your social media offering whatever it is? And so the same thing will be true of these currencies. Bitcoin could be unassailable at some point if it continues to grow. BitGold or Euro Pacific Bank's Goldbacked debit card could also be unassailable if they get big enough, fast enough. So it's kind of a race right now. And the next couple of years will tell the tale. We'll figure out who, if any of them, are going to be the Google of this market. And there's a lot of money to be made by investing in the winner. And so we'll see how it turns out. I have no idea who's going to be the winner at this point. A lot of it is just unpredictable because it depends on government reactions to the rise of these things. And so whether they're going to just try to stamp them out or whether they're going to try to coexist with them, and which country's going to do what, we can't know any of that ahead of time. But it's just one more really fascinating aspect of the markets reacting to the debasement and eventual destruction of these fiat currencies. We're mismanaging them so badly that it's creating demand for alternatives. And that's the real story here. Not which alternative wins, but the fact that alternatives are seen as necessary in the first place. And so since they are necessary and will become only more necessary as time goes on, this part of the market is going to be really fascinating in the next few years.
Yeah, that it is. And it's leading to innovation and leading to new ways of defining currencies, everything that the free market stands for and that government stands against. This is exactly the kind of thing that you want to have happening in a free market economy, in a truly capitalistic economy. And therefore, John, that the government's going to be fighting it tooth and nail, as you said, once it perceives the market as presenting a threat to the status quo, to the banksters that they've spent trillions of dollars protecting. Again, just like Bitcoin, once it presents a threat to the existing economic order.
Yeah, well, we're seeing that on a lot of different levels. Obviously, there's a lot of regulation happening out there where, for instance, the government will define Bitcoin as a commodity, which means you've got a capital gain or a capital loss every time you use something like that to buy or sell. And that's an accounting nightmare. But that's something that can be easily overcome with an app. BitGold offers an app which keeps track of all your transactions and then calculates what your tax liability or your tax loss might be in a given country's tax system. And so that's the kind of number crunching that we can do. So it's not insurmountable, but in the short run, it is a problem. If you have to figure out capital gains and capital losses for Bitcoins, and that's your main currency, you're doing all your spending in it, you've got an amazing amount of number crunching to do in the short run. So we've got to overcome that technically. But there are all kinds of other restrictions that governments can put on cryptocurrencies, and they can just flat out make them illegal if they want to. They're trying to do that with cash, U.S. cash and euros to an extent, where various governments are floating proposals to make cash less and less attractive and ultimately illegal. That's called the war on cash, and that's a big story right now. And the reason that's happening is that cash has become a barrier to the furtherance of today's economic policies. We need to push interest rates down into negative territory if we're going to get any kind of a Keynesian pop, where low interest rates lead people to borrow and buy stuff, and that pumps up the economy. Well, we've got interest rates at zero around the world right now, negative in some cases, and it's not working. So they want to push interest rates down even more negative. And to do that, you can't have people pulling all their cash out of banks and crashing the banking system in that way. So you've got to do something about cash. and so that's another part of the story. Cryptocurrencies as a threat, gold-backed currencies are also a threat potentially, and cash is a threat. So governments are reacting to all this. They're doing it incoherently, of course, but in the end, some kind of a coherent response is going to evolve, and then we'll see a battle between the market and these really aggressive, really coercive government programs. And here again, uncharted territory. We don't know how it's going to turn out, but it's a fascinating process to watch.
Oh, yeah. And there's nothing worse, John, than a cornered animal. And government is looking more and more cornered by the day. And you got to pay the bureaucrats. You got to keep them fed. I mean, that's what this is about, isn't it?
Well, you look at the history of currency crises, and this doesn't look so out of the ordinary. Back in Roman days, they had a hyperinflation when they imposed price controls across the board, which of course bankrupted merchants who couldn't charge enough to cover their costs and started going out of business. And then they passed a law that required you, if your father is a merchant, you have to go into his business and keep the store open on the pain of death. And then after the French Revolution, during the days of John Law, in the first French hyperinflation, they also made it a death penalty offense to demand gold and silver rather than the paper currency that the government was actively destroying. And then the U.S. made gold ownership illegal in the 1930s. It was literally a crime to have gold coins in your house or in a safe deposit box. So crazy stuff happens when governments feel desperate. Like you said, they're cornered, wounded animals right now, and they're getting ready to lash out. And so we shouldn't be surprised if we see some really, really extreme capital controls or other kinds of really draconian restrictions on the uses of cash, for instance, or these cryptocurrencies, or moving money overseas, which we were already seeing that in the U.S. We have de facto capital controls here because it's so hard to move money overseas, and we are so aggressive with foreign banks that a lot of them won't take U.S. customers anymore. Both of the gold-backed currencies that we talked about just now aren't available to U.S. citizens because of that, because it's too much of a bureaucratic regulatory nightmare for these guys to try to service U.S. customers. And so that really is a capital control. We don't call it that. Most people don't think of it as that. But restrictions on your ability to move money in and out of the country are capital controls. Whether they're regulatory and whether they hit other banks outside the country rather than you directly, it doesn't really matter. A capital control is something that keeps you from moving money around as you would otherwise want to do. And we have them in the U.S. now. So it's only going to get more extreme from here and more blatant. So soon they're going to start calling them capital controls. And I think it begins with Greece. If they don't bail Greece out, then Greece will have no choice but to try to keep what little capital it has left from flowing out of the country. This is really a, locking the barn door after the horses run away kind of thing, because they've been dithering for so long that huge amounts of capital have already left. But they'll try to control what's left.
They don't have a choice.
So we'll see, a Western country impose capital controls here.
Yeah, they're finished. That's for sure. It's just how they're going to make their exit. I don't see Russia really coming to their rescue because they'll have to give them $50 or $100 billion. Russia's not in the best shape either. Strategically, it might make sense for Russia, but in the end, they can't save them either. Greece is doomed, period. Anyway, find John's work at dollarcollapse.com. The part about Bitcoin and Peter Schiff's product, which basically is similar to Bitcoin or BitGold, but hooked into a debit card, which makes it a compelling product. Eventually, both products, if they want to be competitive, will be available in the United States. Dollarcollapse.com. Best articles I've seen on both products. And you'll find the link, as always, on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. It's going to get interesting, John, and they can try to keep the price of gold locked in this range all they like, but eventually it's going to break out, and it's going to break out big. I don't know when it's coming, but it is coming, that's for sure. John, we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Kerry. Talk to you then.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.